Here we have the first of two Hot Rod Deluxes. This one is obviously loved. The owner put a Celestian Gold 50-watt Alnico speaker in it, which is right at the edge of what would be a safe recommendation in this amp, which is about 45 watts, which means that's measured clean, and it'll push more than that on peaks, and if you sustained RMS levels can be higher than that when really driven. So I would not recommend the 50-watt gold Alnico for this amp, but depending on how sorry about hitting the camera there, depending on how the owner uses it, it could be just fine. Let's see, maybe he's using it as just a clean thing. All right, check out and call with estimate and replace master volume knob. Some cracks in the knob, that's no big deal. Let me get this rear panel off, and I'll show yet again the trick to not breaking these panels right here where the wood narrows. So the first thing you do is take all the screws off the rear, like you'd expect. And then before you try to remove the rear panel, loosen the screws on the side just a little bit. Because those pull the wooden sides of the cabinet into the metal sides of the chassis. The wood flexes more than the chassis. It just compresses from both sides and pinches this panel. Now there should be no pressure on this panel. It should come out fairly easily. Sometimes there's a little bit of resistance because I use an adhesive tape. But if you don't do that, these panels break all the time. I see it. And it's just a unnecessary failure. All right, I've worked on this amp before. Changed out the filter caps to F&Ts. Put in these elevated 5-watt resistors here. The diodes I must have mounted on the other side of the board. It's been a while, I don't recall this amp. And the two plate resistors in the phase inverter, which fail all the time, have been replaced, top side away from the heat. What I see before I do anything else is that this 6L6, the lettering, is white. This 6L6, GT6L6C, is like a darker beige. That's not a shadow, that's a difference. One of these tubes has gotten warmer than the other. And at least this preamp tube says EI. And EI was a Yugoslavian make of tubes, and they used to be fantastic. They closed that plant, and the ones that were left on the market were the ones that were previously rejected and tend to be very microphonic. So we shall see. Before I do anything else, I'm going to make sure it has the proper fuse. 3 amp. Power it on. Make sure that the light comes on. The light does not come on. Is it just loose? Or is it a bad bulb? I have bulbs. All right, that bulb is tricky to pick up. I'll show you a trick. Once you get it loose in the bayonet, a little bit of painter's tape or masking tape. Pretty dark. Let's try a different bulb in there. I'll do that after a while. I will confirm that there is heater voltage there, though. It's kind of dangerous when an amp's indicator doesn't come on. The average person might not know that it's a hazard. Yeah, but we got AC there, so I'm not concerned about the heater supply not working. I'll change that bulb out later. Let's set the volumes to same places. And the tone stack. Yeah, master pot is pretty free spinning. Let me go ahead and take the pot off. And make sure, the knob off, make sure the pot's okay. Yeah, the pot itself is fine. When that plastic breaks, the set screw, rather than tightening up against the shaft of the pot, just pushes the plastic farther and farther apart. So that's going away. All right, all volumes off. Take it out of standby. Normal little chitter chatter I have right now with the Wi-Fi router. It gets better and worse. I've got it partially shielded, but interestingly, this is microphonic This EI is not. Let me put it in standby and see what's in here. I'm putting it standby to pull that, not because it's, not because it's unsafe, but because it's a very loud pop. It's got a 12AT7 in V1, which is incorrect. A 12AY7 can be fine. I'm gonna put this 7025 that was in the phase inverter here in the preamp slot, and try this 12AT7 in the phase inverter, which is a much better choice of tube for that position. You can use an AT or an AX here. You can use a AY or DW7 or 5751 or 12X7 here. And what is this EI? All right, it's an ECC 83. So 12X7, 12X7, 12AT7. I will talk to the owner. If he's looking for the lower gain that he was getting with that 12AT there, an AY is a better choice because it's a matter of dry voltage versus current and what the amp is best at, and impedances and stuff, what the tube is best at. And you use different tubes for different reasons, as not just the gain factor. So that crackle, let's put it back in standby. See if that crackle is just one of those old tubes warming up, or whether this systemic thing. I suspect that crackle is the EI. We'll come back to that, the EI-EIO. And the next thing I want to do is check where the bias is at. 60 millivolts is factory. And given the discoloration on the lettering there, that's my first thing I want to check. So it's at 50 millivolts. That's with 120 volt mains. I guarantee last time I had this amp in, it would have been set to at least to the factory, if not higher. All right, now it's at 60. Let's see what the pots are like. No nasty scratches there. Reverb tank is missing from the amp, so let's keep that reverb at 0, shall we? It's got the cables, but no tank. I'll ask him if he wants a reverb tank. There's no scratch on it, just noise from no load. Presence is fine. And the drive. All that sounds okay. All the switches are behaving normally. That scratchiness, I want to find out which one of these tubes is making that crackle at startup. Let that tube warm up. Slightly microphonic, not too bad. I'll only know when I do high gain testing. I am concerned about the current draw. What are the screen voltages on this thing? I know I'm kind of freewheeling on this, going from one thing to the next, but that's how this stuff works. Let's see, 1, 2, 422, 422, 422, 422. So the voltages across each screen resistor are good, the screen grid resistors. They can fail in these amps. I just find it odd that the tube are discolored and the bias went down. I'm not entirely happy with those tubes, but it's not exactly at the point where they must be replaced. So when I call the owner to let him know what I found, I'll say that it's optional. I'll explain the pros, cons, and that I don't sell tubes. So I'm not trying to make money off him by mentioning the fact that it might be better to have some new tubes in there. All right, is the voltage drained off yet? All right, the voltage is gone. I can measure resistance across these screen grids. 464, 465, and the grid stoppers, 1.5, 1.5. And the grid leaks, bias leaks rather, 216 and 219. So nothing really sticks out as being bad. We had a incorrect tube in the phase inverter versus V1, a noisy tube. That's of concern, but they may not be an issue for a while. I will check the speaker cable next. The bias was too cold. I think it needs a reverb tank, but that's the owner's decision. There's a lot of dust everywhere, and the lamp bulb was dead. So this is pretty minor stuff, but that's good since I had done all this large work before. I was not expecting this one to need anything major once I saw that this was one I had previously worked on. And as to not recognizing it, I work on a lot of amps. It's cutting out as I turn it. I work on an awful lot of Hot Rod DeVilles and Hot Rod Deluxes. So yeah, there's a position here as I turn this molded plastic plug where the sound going to the speaker cuts out. These things are crappy. So what I'm going to tell the owners, I recommend that I replace this with the Switchcraft plug with some real wire. I could reuse this wire, but it's a short length. The good stuff is inexpensive. So real wire soldered to his Celestion, real plug that won't cause an issue. New bulb, new master volume knob, and that he gets this bisveined if it passes its high gain tests, because I already have it, it's in stock, and that the 12AT7 is a really good choice here. And then the options are a new pair of 6L6s, though that could be kicked on down the road. Maybe two prices will come down over the next 6 months or so. And the option of a new reverb tank, one of the various 9E and 8E series tanks, or 4E. The E stands for the impedance versus the A that we use in a tube fender, in terms of a tube reverb circuit. The E is for the solid state reverb circuit that you see here. So this one's pretty healthy overall. I'll put this one to the side and we'll do triage on the second Hot Rod Deluxe. Time for Hot Rod Deluxe number 2. Ticket says, scratchy pots, master volume not working on dirty channel. Well, scratchy pots are usually a sign of dirt. And with a panel this filthy, who'd believe that this thing would have any dirt issues? I don't understand spending $700 on something and then letting it get like this. But this master volume not working might just be the knobs not tight. Nope, they broke the pot. Okay. So it needs a new pot. Did they super glue it? Did someone super glue this? Really, people? Yeah, they did. Alright. You know, when they said in that guitar stringing video that people who do that locking loop should be shot, that's hyperbole. That's not nice and it's not useful to any conversation. But people who super glue pots on, first against the wall. I was wanting to bend my tool. Great. I can bend that back by hand, but let's see. Do that to protect the surface. Don't want to scratch the chassis of this beautiful specimen. All right, yeah, you can see the pot shaft is just pulled out. The pots in these things aren't expensive. But hey, his knob still works, so let's see, that little LED isn't lined up. I'll fix that in the process of the rest of this. And at some point I'll probably give it a cleaning and it will weep for joy. Let's look at the rest of it. All right, this has never had any work done to it. These caps may or may not be good. They're not leaking. That doesn't always mean that they're good, but there's the heat discoloration there around these 5-watt components. You can see the board is darkened and the texture of the fiberglass is beginning to telegraph through the surface. It's just gotten way too hot. So I know when I lift this board out, there's going to be a horror show there. We're going to have to pull the board anyway to change out that master volume pot and to clean things. So let me go ahead and get started on that. Check a few other things real fast. All right, 3 amp slow blow fuse, no problem there. All right, so before I power it on, I'm going to check all the IC brand filter caps for shorts. This resistor here always gets hot and burns the board. On the hot rod, it's R97. Different number on some of the other hot rod and blues series, but it's the same problem. These two resistors get too hot and burn the board. There's a 5-watt diode here, Zener diode, and right here, those burn the board. On the hot rods, the 100K and 82K plate resistors to the phase inverter fail. Sometimes the screen grid resistors to the output tubes like to fail. A lot of times you'll have solder-starved connections, particularly on the output tubes, which generate a lot of heat. And as you already saw, these molded plastic speaker cables are kind of crappy and unreliable. They save the wrong 50 cents. All right, so I'll take out a standby. Really noisy, really hissy. Same issue with this molded speaker cable. As I turn it, this signal sometimes cuts out. That's not good for the health of the amp. All right, let's turn the volumes off. Even with the volume off, it's still passing signal. The mids pod is also messed up, just like the master. I can make it go in and out by pulling on the shaft, but that's not a healthy thing. If I go to the master volume, probably broke in the off position, because if I go to the drive channel, there's no signal. I'll have to triple check that. Anyway, let me go to the master so it'll be quiet, so I can test the bias setting, because you can't test the bias at idle if there is signal like that. All right, it's at 36 millivolts as opposed to 60. Each tube is equally warm. Neither one's getting as hot as it should, though. What's the DC at? 427. All right, just bias really freaking cold. And it's still painted where it was left in the factory, so about half as much current as it should have. I think it's probably a sign of failing output tubes, but let's humor it and see if they're possibly good. So a fairly significant turn on the bias pot is necessary to get this where it ought to be. All right. And there's the heat damage from that R97 I mentioned. Going over here, there's extensive heat damage from those two 5-watt resistors and that 5-watt Zener diode. The other one has not begun to get toasty yet. The good news is this: while this looks scary, it's nowhere near as bad as these commonly get. So that can be fixed now before the damage is permanent or really, really fugly. Everything else looks pretty standard. No real broken solder joints on the input jacks or the pots. 2 of the pots at least will get replaced. The others will probably just get cleaned up. But the mid-range and master volume pots need to go. Threads on all these jacks will get cleaned. And given that I already have the board pulled and that there are only 4 filter caps in the amp, let me get it to focus. It's not a lot of money for those 4 caps. It's really easy to change them once the board has been pulled. So most of the labor is just getting access. Now that access has been granted, because I had to change out those 2 pots, it would make sense for me to change these out preventatively for the owner. So I will speak to him and see if he is so inclined. So to sum up, I'm going to clean this top panel, because yikes, it needs it. It's going to get a new mids pot and master volume pot because they're physically broken. We're going to replace the 5-watt components here, which have been burning the board. The new components will be placed off the board so that heat damage does not occur again. Every time I show this in a hot rod or blues amp, someone says, mine's been working great for forever. I don't have no problems with it, because people have no concept of what a meaningful sample size is. I would say that 60% plus of all the hot rods and blues that come in have this problem. And from talking to other techs, they all see this all the time, to the point where you get a hot rod in, this stuff gets changed. So I'm glad your Chevy Nova hasn't blown up on you, but you haven't been rear-ended yet. I would like to change these filter caps because they do leak and they cause shorts and accelerate other issues in the amp. This amp has got the input jacks and foot switch jack of the larger size, which means that this also correlates to an improvement in the quality of the resistors used for the plates on the phase inverter. So that probably does not need to be changed. This amp does need a real speaker plug and a real speaker cable, like so many do, because if you can turn it and the signal cuts out, that can vibrate to a point where you have no connection on a gig and you lose output tubes, you can lose a transformer, you can lose a speaker. These things are not good. You won't always have a very solid, reliable load. So it makes no sense to have a high-quality switchcraft jack and then a cheap little plug. Let's get a switchcraft plug in there, or Neutrik, or Amphenol, but not this plastic molded garbage. I'm a little concerned about the long-term reliability of this pair of L6s because they were biased so cold, but the bias supply, it could be an issue with one of these caps beginning to fail. It could be a problem related to the low voltage supply here, just draining stuff down. So I'm not going to worry about this until all this has been fixed, because that bias voltage may well change once everything else is good. So let me talk to the owner and see where we go next. All right, Hot Rod 3 today is this Hot Rod DeVille 2x12. And it had broken plastic input jacks, as you can see there. It's got some new Switchcraft metal frame jacks, and it's sounding quite nice. That sounds all right. I mean, it's a Hot Rod DeVille. It's real mid-range heavy, and the reverb wants to kick in, and it goes from nothing to, oh my God, that's loud, instantly. But now it does it reliably without cutting out, so mission accomplished here. All right, Hot Rod 4 is a fairly new Hot Rod Series 4. I keep calling them different numbers. It's the same circuit with the same flaws, just different cosmetics. It's got the black panel rather than the chrome. Same heat damage from that resistor, those two 5-watt resistors, those two 5-watt Zeners. Same as it ever was. On this one, while I have the board out, I already have authorization to change out all these nasty IC brand filter caps. So, about to get started on all that fun stuff. Get that little zip tie. And let's see if I can get these off here so there's less stress on the board. They have way too much mass for those tiny little single-sided non-through hole solder connections. The pads on the back just lift up with any kind of mass pressing against them once the solder joints start to get hot and fail. And that's not what it should be like. And, it's like I said earlier in the video, it's well more than half of all blues and hot rods, specifically the hot rod deluxe that come in, have the same damage every time. Now, I'm sure there are some out there that never have any problems. But statistically, when these same points of failure are the most common things that we techs find, on relatively new amps most of the time. I have to get in here with a tool. I can't grab that. I just don't understand why there's not been a class action lawsuit already. This Fender does not care and will not care unless the market forces them to. And as these continue to be one of the most popular selling amps of all time, the market is rewarding them over and over again for total disregard of their customers. Le junk. Let me change it all out. All right, new components that get hot mounted off the board for better airflow. Taking a break from the 4 hot Rod Deluxes, we've got a Blues Deluxe, which is a very similar amp, different preamp circuit. Most of the other bits are the same. It's got different filtering though. And this one says randomly switches channels, needs a new input jack. That's to be expected on these. So randomly changing channels, that's a little bit odd. That's usually another failure in the low voltage supply. But on this model, it's not as prone to baking as the hot rod. We shall find out. Sometimes you just get a bad solder joint, but yeah. Getting little pops sometimes when I press around here. And the signal's gone. And it just came back. So, it went away again. Also, something's microphonic. I think it's this tube that's microphonic. But until I get it to be reliably on, all bets are off. So if it seems like there's a bad solder joint, I need to change this jack anyway. Let's get this board pulled, and then we'll see if anything looks squirrely on the other side as far as solder joints go, and check for heat damage in this area. Well, no real surprise. This one's got broken solder joints, and the broken jack's been reflowed in the past. A lot of broken solder joints on the pot connections. A lot of flux where people have retouched things. That's not factory. This entire burned area, typical in the low voltage supply, though I see it more often in the hot rods than the blues. But there it is. More broken solder joints on these jacks and stuff. All pretty typical stuff. I know the owner of this amp. I've done a bunch of amps for him. And since I've got to do a bunch of stuff on the back of this board, I'm going to change out the filter caps at the same time. I know that's what he's going to want. So, time to get started. Okay, all the 5-watt stuff changed out just like you saw before. All the filter caps changed out, silicone, etc., etc. A whole lot of solder joints reflowed, particularly on these jacks and all the pots, but a lot of stuff in this area as well. I reflowed all the solder joints to the tube sockets. They're a little bit solder starved, and I went through and I pressed on the board like you saw before. It's not cutting out. I thought I had some more L12A jacks, the long bushing switchcraft jacks. I am out. I will get those Monday morning. So I've got one temped in. The amp sounds great. So I'm really pleased with this. All the problems it had have been addressed. It'll have 2 shiny new switchcraft long bushing jacks on Monday. But right now I'm gonna go have a Friday night like a normal human being. Gasp.